you're doing fine.
All right, as I was saying here, this is going to be our last meeting for a while. After today, I guess we, meaning DEP, we have to do our work to draft the report and recommendations. And once we're done with that, I guess we'll regroup. We'll send a copy to everybody, and then we'll regroup thereafter. So I don't have a definite date, especially given that the heavy workload that we have here on this end. So. The other thing is that last month we received the recommendations from Dave Thompson and who else sent us the recommendations? Aisha.
I think I sent you something last month, and then
We had recommendations sent on February 28th from Jim Ontwistle, Dave.
Oh, Jim. Yeah,
Dunbar.
Jim, Dave, and Dunbar, yeah.
Yes.
Dunbar.
Yep.
Okay. And then today we received the recommendations from
Jim, Joe, and Dunbar, and Chris.
Jim, Joe, and Dunbar. Okay, so yeah. Okay.
Chris gave recommendations today too.
Oh, Chris. Okay. All right. So, Lyle and Stephanie, I guess you don't have any recommendations you'd like to send us?
I do have recommendations from Stephanie that she gave to us back on December the 20th. Her recommendations about the hot knife.
Okay.
You know, when she did the report on the hot knife, that's the last submission from Stephanie on December the 20th.
Yeah, and I'm preparing some. I have some research going on of a concern I have that's actually growing stronger, and I've also taken into account the recommendations that came from the others, which were very much appreciated. But I've actually, the concern I have, I've contacted the chief scientist at NREL to talk it over, and I'd like to have. I'm also looking for research papers on the topic, so I need a little bit longer to make those connections. Is there a time limit for me to get those in?
Well, Dan, we were talking about April 18th. Would that be enough time? That means 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks. I mean, I guess, and Lyle, not that I'm not in any way unsympathetic to that. You know, I do think though, you know, we're now past the original 1 year mentioned in the, you know, executive order. We're in the process of making sure that we can officially get the 1 year extension, but, you know, that's to have the deliverable of the report. And, you know, I understand, I mean, you know, having written a dissertation myself, it's like new things keep coming and you keep having new concerns, but it's like at some point, you know, so I mean, if you said,
I understand. Well, I'll plan to get it in by the 18th.
Okay. And then I don't know, is Sean Thompson here from DCA?
Yes.
So Sean, I mean, if you had anything in terms of the concerns of, you know, community affairs or anything that you wanted to get into or write up, if 2 weeks would work for you, April 18th.
Yes, it does. But right now, I'm just I'm looking forward to everyone else's recommendations to see how that may impact the work that we do at DCA.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, no, I just wasn't sure if, you know, you were planning on submitting anything or not, but yeah, if there's so let's 2 weeks and then, you know, we can start analyzing and collating and putting everything together.
But on the you triggered a thought. As things are evolving at a rapid, quick pace, and I did read the article in the Spotlight. You know, it seems to me that we're in a different universe than where we once began when we first started our conversations. And one thing that is of some importance is the fact that it seems to appear as though they're reducing any financial incentive for installations. And I don't know
Yeah.
what that suggests for any recommendations. I know we were talking about a fee, a possible fee program of some sort, as well as an incentive to actually site a facility to do this process. I don't know whether those still have any, any life left in it based on, everything that I'm reading.
Mhm. I could comment on that if you're interested. The context for some of the recommendations that I've read from folks, which are one in particular that I would mention that I think is logical is to establish a fee upfront to cover the recycling and establish essentially a fund out of that fee that would be collected over time to make sure that the recycling happens. And as commented on in that and other recommendations, this is a industry that's new and growing, and a lot of companies come and go out of business. It's happening, with frightening regularity. So to make producers responsible is really difficult, especially because they're in China. So how do you enforce? So to have that fund, it seems to be a logical way to go. It's just, I think, what we need to make sure of is that it's coordinated with the ability of the state to keep building solar, as the Energy Master Plan anticipates. And as that article notes, the incentives are going down. Well, they're supposed to. We're supposed to have the incentives decrease over time as solar panels get cheaper. Sometimes you get into a period of time where solar panels are not getting cheaper, they're getting more expensive. That's what's happening now, and for the past year, and probably for the next year or two as well. And a lot of that is policy driven, with tariffs being imposed. So and sometimes the BPU will set incentive levels and then find out, a year later the rate of installations has dropped dramatically. That's also what's happening now, and can correct itself. So these are ups and downs that we sometimes expect, but we need to be aware of them, I think, and other policy shifts. For instance, there's also a bill that's been introduced by Senator Smith that will impose another fee on solar developers, and this is to pay for the cost of infrastructure upgrades. That was mentioned in today's article, that we are in the middle of an infrastructure crisis because circuits are closing down all over the state because they've reached their limit, and we need to react to that and make sure that the state stays open for business, and that means another fee. So if this fee comes on top of that, and you're in an environment of a bump in price and a dip in incentives, it could be devastating. So I think coordination with the BPU and with the governor's office is necessary to say, here's a fee that probably makes sense. There's another fee for infrastructure that makes sense. How do we balance that against what's going on with the industry at large, federal policy, and the incentive policy, and make sure that it all works out? I think it's important to take that into account. And it would be helpful if we could start to estimate what that fee could possibly be.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all very good points. I mean, especially, like you said, the idea of some of the subsidies, if you will, is that, as the industry develops, that, they're supposed to be withdrawn, that it's supposed to be self-supporting, which, I mean, as we've talked about in these meetings, there are sort of those competing goals of, that versus that, if we're trying to enhance the amount of solar, that those two things sort of might run into each other at some point, that if the price goes up dramatically, you're not going to have that. And I think also, too, I mean, that these are, this article is good and instructive, that it's like, clearly we can't plan solely for the worst, but being aware that, it's entirely possible that in the next, 5 or 7 or 10 or 20 years that, you know, events like this in terms of, you know, the pandemic or tariffs or international conflicts and all can issue and mess with the supply chain are all things that, you know, whatever recommendations we come up with, that if they're going to be good, they should try to account for those in some way.
Yeah, true. And, you know, there's the other aspect, which is the ratepayer burden. You know, the fees and all that sort of thing essentially land on the ratepayers eventually, because the incentives are drawn from ratepayer dollars. So it's necessary to be sensitive to the ratepayer impact too. But you know, the reaction to the cost of solar and shifts in the cost of solar should be the burden of the BPU to react, and hopefully they're nimble enough to, you know, help smooth out those waves and keep the industry going. Something like this, a fee for the infrastructure or a fee for recycling, should be something that we set in place, and that's a long-term, predictable factor that the BPU could then take into account along with the other factors they have to weigh. And so theoretically, it ought to work out.
I mean, I would say too, ideally, I think, you know, and this is something that clearly at this point that we can't account for because it hasn't happened. You know, we don't know what that'll be exactly or the exact shape of it. And, you know, it's a long way from becoming a law. But that said, I mean, I do think that we could include in our recommendations. I mean, to me personally, I think realizing that that is a possibility, that there could be something like this infrastructure fee, that it would make sense in our recommendations to provide some sort of statement on that, where, if, you know, we are to say, hey, you know, we've recognized that movements in the state legislature indicate the fact that there may be other fees associated with solar panels in the future, and that, you know, the commission thinks it would make sense, you know, for all of these fees to be, you know, maybe bundled into one fee at some, you know, whatever point they're at, that, you know, whether or not we think it would be a good idea for those to be, you know, gosh, all of these should be paid at the point of sale, all of these should be paid for, you know, whatever point they're paid for, you know, whether or not those should be together or separate, because, you know, I mean, that might be, even if the legislature, even if DEP or whoever, the BPU had the authority to change those fees, but to have them all bundled in one place. So, you know, it's not like where you buy a car and then it's like, okay, well, this is the car price, but then you're also paying the title and, you know, 5 other things that then get tacked on. If this could all be tacked on at one point in time and under one umbrella, to whoever it's visible to, be that the, you know, wholesaler, the installer, the resident, I think that that might be a good thing.
Yeah, it would
So
make
let me ask you
sense.
a question. Could you say a little bit more about the infrastructure fee, how it's being considered and what it would be used for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I took me a second to realize that was to me. Yeah, so
Sorry.
the infrastructure problem is that as more and more solar gets connected to the grid, there's a challenge in the grid's ability to accept it. And part of that is just bringing the regulations up to date. I was on the first working group to establish interconnect standards, and that was all the way back in 2000, where it was just a different world in terms of global warming and the urgency of that and all that. And so, and solar was brand new. The utilities didn't know what to do with it. So those standards were extremely restrictive, and many of them are still in place to this day. So we can create different standards. We can talk about using technology that's already built into the solar projects that can help open up circuits. I could give several examples of that, but don't want to spend that much time. But at some point, we've got to put in infrastructure such as batteries, new controls for substations, even enlarging circuits to be able to accept more solar. And it's a fundamental feature of having high penetration solar wherever it's done, that you need these infrastructure upgrades in order to continue and get get to the energy master plan and the legal goals that we have in the state. So it's really about the infrastructure of the electric grid.
Well, and let me add to that, at the same time, we're being, well, the Energy Master Plan is wanting us to transfer to transportation, electric vehicles and plug-in, so the amount of
Right.
power that needs to be delivered is likely rising. And so you need to upgrade the infrastructure even for that.
Sure, and it's interesting, there are actually some positive synergies between the electric vehicle problem and the solar problem, where there would be common solutions that would serve both. And there's also the fascinating fact that electric vehicles may provide the storage that we need to smooth out solar and wind on the grid.
Mhm.
And I know the DEP is very involved in that, in vehicle to grid or V2G pilots and projects and stuff.
I guess in our case, we are really moving in the direction of supporting the EV vehicle industry. I think when I first showed interest in, was nominated for this commission, we had a solar plant joint venture with Tesla in Buffalo, which we've since, had to, I guess, wind down. I'm not saying that we're getting out of the solar business, but it's definitely a much more, marginal business for us than EV batteries are.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, Lyle, I have a question for you. Is there a specific amount of fee that would be, for the lack of a better word, would be a red line that would make the solar business, solar panel business kind of not worth it, its while or something? I mean, is there a
Right. Well, I guess in the context of, certainly there would be such a point at which the burden on ratepayers gets to the point where it's politically untenable and practical. I think in the context of this conversation, we can sort of get a rough idea of the of what the impact we're talking about. For instance, many of the conversations in the past and some of the comments threw out a figure for recycling at, I think the one that came in today was saying $25 a panel, which we had heard in the past, and that the salvage value might be $3, which is, pretty small in relation, but that's a $22 net, perhaps. Well, shoot, let's not say that, because that did not include transportation. So let's just say it's $25 for the time being. And the average panel that we'd be talking about, especially the first ones to sort of come to their end of the life, are probably about 275 watts average, would be a guess. So that's about 9 cents a watt. That's about a 5% increase in the total cost of a turnkey solar project. And that's very, very significant. It would mean that there would have to be, if roughly speaking, the incentive is paying for half of the revenue in the project, then if the incentive is providing half of the total revenue, and that has to go up to cover a 9%, a 5% overall increase, that means the incentive has to increase by 10%. So that's a very, very substantial increase in the incentive and the burden on ratepayers. Now, the infrastructure, just for comparison, the infrastructure increase that was proposed is about 5 cents a watt. So that's about a 2.5% increase, roughly speaking. So the infrastructure fee that's being proposed is about half of the impact of what we might be talking about for a recycling fee. I'd say it is a very, very substantial impact on the rate impact of the solar panels.
Lyle, this is David again. I have a question, please. You suggested a cost in terms of price per watt. Would it be different if we look at it in a price per pound basis where, you sell, maybe it's 1,000,000 pounds of panels today, but there's only 10,000 pounds of panels that come off and need to be recycled, and you made the calculations based on a per pound basis. Would that substantially alter it or not?
No, it wouldn't alter it, because if we put it in terms of the price per pound, we would just have to translate it to a cost per watt anyway.
Or the incentive, right?
That's where it hits the ground. Is what percentage increase in the overall cost of doing business is represented by the fee.
So, but there might be another factor to consider in setting the fee. The number being installed now is much greater than the number being recycled. And so if the fee were at least small to begin with, but maybe as you evaluate after 5 years and 10 years, whatever, then the fee might change as the balance between new installs and retired panels changes. So there could be a way to start small, get in the habit, and not perturb the incentives too much.
And if I may comment on that, Dunbar, we've been doing a lot of talking with other states about paint care. And, that's the model in a lot of those other states, is that, really most of them, I think there's about a dozen or 15 states with paint stewardship programs, and the huge majority of them, are able to operate without a loss in terms of, and a lot of that comes from there is much more paint being sold than being returned in a year, and that they sort of have a ramp to be able to get up to that. So, I mean, I just, thinking about this conceptually, I do think that that's a relevant point in terms of, that if we are now, and I'm making up these numbers, but if we're now at a point where, installations are 10,000 modules a year, but, 2,000 are coming out of service each year, there is a bit of a ramp to get up to where you're not paying the full cost of the recycling of each module as on the front end, because you have some room to sort of grow into that.
That's an excellent point, and there's two other points. I think it's a great idea, Dunbar. Two other reasons why that can work is that, first of all, we expect the solar panels over time, blips like we're in now notwithstanding, over time the price of solar is expected to go down, and so you're more easily able to afford additions like this. And the other point is that the recycling technology is expected to get better and more cost effective as well. So all of that fits pretty well with a ramp scenario like you suggested.
I guess what I wanted to say is that I support that approach and think that, that the volume of panels that would come off now for recycling are going to be very low compared to what is being sold. Therefore, we could have a very, very small fee in the beginning, but you'd have to build in, Daniel, this is what I wanted to say, some capacity for whoever manages this money to maybe adjust the fee over time in the event that they begin to catch up with each other.
Yes, excellent.
Yes,
point.
exactly.
Right. Yeah, that would be a reasonable assumption.
So Dunbar, $5, $10 per solar panel? What do you think?
I'm thinking 50 cents.
50 cents? No.
Yeah.
I may be too optimistic, but.
Okay, so Lyle, you said we should try to reach out to BPU on this.
Yeah, just to coordinate so that they're aware that there may be, in addition to what's in the law just now being introduced by Senator Smith for the infrastructure fee, that there's another potential fee coming down the road recommended by this commission, and that it's got to be factored into future incentive discussions. Yeah, so they should be a part of this conversation, I think. And if we're going to do a combined fund, as Daniel is suggesting, they should be aware that, they might be the candidate to manage that fund. Because the infrastructure part, that's all about electric infrastructure, and they, of course, have the expertise in that. So if we want to consolidate this with the other, that's where it very well might land.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much interaction we have with BPU, though, our department. I mean, there was a brief time years ago, they were actually part of our department. It was called DEPE, Department
Yeah, that was a long
Environmental
time
Protection
ago.
Energy, but that was like another lifetime. That was
Yeah. Uh-huh.
so I don't even know how much. So I don't know how practical it would be to combine the fees with them.
Yeah, the one interaction, I mean, there are a number of interactions that I'm aware of between the department and the BPU. The one that's been ongoing for a while is the DEP's role in designating landfills for what's called subsection T solar on landfill projects. And that's kind of they have a regular role every single project the DEP does a review of those, but and I know the DEP aspires to regular liaison with the DEP, but I'm not sure with whom.
Okay. Oh, we'll have to find that out here. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's an appropriate time, I wanted to sort of give an update on a concern that I had expressed before, and just about where I am with that. Because as I said, the concern is growing, which is um, if modules immediately when they get to a recycling facility are crushed, it is exposing that module to possibly hundreds of thousands of times more potential for leaching than it originally would have, possibly even millions of times more potential for leaching. And that occurs to me to be an extraordinary dangerous thing to do, unless we can all be assured that after crushing, that product would never be exposed to the elements. And I would say if there's an expectation that crushing will take place, we would have to be extremely certain that that's not any potential outcome under any circumstance, that it would then be exposed to the elements. And the reason is that a whole solar panel is as close to perfect encapsulation as modern technology can get it, because that's required for its performance. These days, the power warranty is extending to 30 years, and that's with a 80% guarantee 30 years from now. So it's the most sophisticated science in the world goes into making sure that it's perfectly encapsulated for that kind of time period. And once it's crushed, all of that disappears. Crushing machinery not only is going to crush the size and expose all of those edges to leaching, but there's generally very high shear forces that will tend to shear off the encapsulation from the glass and the other components. So you're talking about just a tremendous increase in the potential for leaching. So I think that the recycling facility either has to make certain that they remain whole, or if crushed, that that product will never be exposed to the elements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would adequate secondary containment system address your concern, like we have for hazardous waste facilities, like concrete pad if crushing is done there?
But if you're going to do that, the best way to do it would be to take all potential precautions to make sure that the module isn't broken before putting it into that containment, right? Because why increase the potential leachate by hundreds of thousands or millions of times, rather than leave that careful, perfect encapsulation in place to the extent possible. So wherever it goes, it would be a good idea to keep that encapsulation intact, if possible.
But that virtually means it cannot be material reprocessed for reclamation.
Well, and so that's why I said if it's going to happen, that reclamation needs to be of a nature, and we have to be 100% certain that if we are going to make that tremendous increase in the potential for leaching, that reclamation is a kind of reclamation that would ensure that those materials are never exposed to the environment.
Mm-hmm. That's the recycler's job, I think.
Yeah. Well, but we
need to
need to make sure we know where it goes from there, right? The recyclable does his job. We've got to know. I don't think we can just assume that where it goes from there is fine. I think we need to know where it goes next.
I agree. You cannot assume.
Yeah, right.
I agree.
Yeah, and I'm one of the things I'm trying to do is see if there's research out there that studies leachate both of intact solar panels and crushed ones or broken ones, and I'm getting some little hints, but it's been hard to find specifics on that.
Okay. Anybody else has any comments on that, or?
We've been talking
On that last
about.
point, if I could, but by the way, I apologize for getting in late. I had a conflict that came up at the last minute. And so I patched in at 2:30. I apologize for not being on board earlier. On that last point that you raised, Lyle, I did cite in my own recommendation paper, the International Energy Agency did some work on landfilling the panels, and they come up with an astounding point that even in an unsecured landfill, the potential for adverse effects on human health parameters is pretty okay.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. If landfilling is done with intact or mostly intact solar panels, like I said, the encapsulation is as perfect as modern technology can provide. And they're still researching ways to make it better because they have to be that way just to perform. And so I'm not surprised the potential is low, but crushed modules, I'd be very, very, not so confident.
I tried to see the model that they used for landfill. They don't describe it, but every landfill I've ever been on, they pride themselves on the density of their compaction, and I'm not sure what effect that would have on these panels. I would assume it's going to break them open somehow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the perfect solution, if you could, ensure that it happens this way, would be to remove the aluminum and the copper, which are the parts that have the most value. After that's done, intact panels can be extremely dense, more so than crushed material, because there's literally no air left. You've got solid material, whereas crushed, you've got air spaces in between. So the density could be done if done with care. Yeah, and I had seen a study done in India that seemed to have done some testing on leachate, both with intact and non-intact modules, but I'm still searching for the detail backing that up.
Sorry, Dave, did you have something? Did you have a comment?
I was just going to say that we've been talking about this issue, during the course of our discussions, and I have always thought that the primary materials of concern are going to be associated with lead solder in older panels in the electronics.
Mm-hmm. That may be the
case, because I think most of us have begun to switch to lead-free solders in the 2006 timeframe.
true, and I think those concerns are mostly confined to these older solar panels, which fortunately are very small in number in New Jersey, because 2006 is around when it really took off.
Yeah, that'd be.
Sorry, to Dave, to your question, I mean, I think we're also at least a little bit concerned, and it sounded like from our discussion about crushing it up and all, that plastics are at least of a little bit of concern. You know, that the idea of, you know, like anything with plastics in it, you know, sitting in a landfill or wherever else, if it's exposed to the elements and that leaches into the water, that's also not good. I mean, I agree with you in terms of where the primary focus is, but, you know, there has been, I think, renewed interest in, you know, sort of what happens to plastics as they break down and how they end up in, you know, our waterways and in people.
Yeah.
So
that's a really good point, and I think that, again, that points to you know, crushing and tearing that happens in crushing processes, you know, have the more potential to generate, you know, microplastics and that sort of thing. Furthermore, there's two main plastic components to a solar panel. One would be the encapsulants, and then the other would be the backsheet. Now, the backsheet is the one that's particularly engineered for longevity in the elements, because that's the one that's exposed to the elements and has to be, you know, extremely long-lived, which would suggest probably very little leachate from them, because then they would degrade, and they cannot degrade. If you expose what's inside, the encapsulants, I don't know, you know, if that's as confident a thing. I mean, they are also very, very long-lived materials, but, you know, again, probably better not to expose them if you can help it.
Okay.
So if we could change gears for just a couple minutes, and I'll comment on what I sent in this morning, which was really following up from a discussion from last time that related to the potential of reuse. Even though they may have degraded power, they may still be operational. And so I was articulating or maybe re-articulating that I don't like the idea of shipping them overseas in a degraded form where we would not have certainty that they'd be disposed of properly. And so I pointed out there might be a way within New Jersey to find secondary uses, and I threw out Habitat for Humanity or sort of underserved populations where there might be a way on apartment buildings, or you know, I know there's community solar as a theme, but that's still bigger projects on buildings or land that would be with new modules. But here, if we had still working modules, maybe there'd be a path to keep them in New Jersey and in use. Now, the other part of my letter included those price breakdowns, and when you're talking about system installations, and I'm still guessing that if you had free used solar panels, even for underserved populations, you probably would still prefer new panels. But at least that's a scenario that could engage a reuse without losing track of them. So that's all.
Yeah, I read that, and I was thinking, would there be someone would have to sign off that these panels are usable, they have some life left in them, in order for Habitat or nonprofit to assume ownership, so to speak. It's who would you recommend be that intermediary? Would it be DEP or?
Well, if you had a recycling facility, then probably you could have a a light box flash power measurement for every module that comes in. So this one's dead, this one's dead, this one is at 50% or 50 watts or whatever power you measure it at, and then it'd get a little sticker and go out into use again. But it still would remain as big as it was when you bought it, but it's now operating at 50% of the power from when it was designed, and who knows?
Well, and if there were an agency in charge of that program that would have rules for the program, those rules could include a requirement for a competent party like a professional engineer would have to certify that they've been tested and or be in charge of a program of testing. That's probably
okay. And I'm also thinking about the Habitat. Habitat is volunteers, so I'm assuming that they would have to actually, I don't know, be fortunate enough to have volunteers that have the expertise and credentials to install the panels.
Yeah, and the basic need would be for an electrician. There's the manual labor too, and you need qualified people for that, but especially they would need electricians.
Maybe they could be incentivized with tax breaks and credits and things of that nature.
Habitat?
Yeah.
No, the installers, the electricians, the people needed to install it. No, I know how Habitat works, but on the lines of Habitat, there are plenty of other places in the city. There's the rescue mission. Homefront has a shelter here. There's a bunch of places that could use those cells that if they still have power in them. That's not a problem finding the needy places for it to go to, but like checking, making sure that they're okay and who's going to install them. I mean, nobody want to install them for free, but
Well, and speaking of incentives, the best solution would be to leave them in place where they were originally installed for the longest possible period of time. And that may turn into a need for an incentive for all these places to keep them there producing power, for free with no cost, being involved. And I was disturbed to see that one of the, among public projects, one of the largest early projects has decided to replace all of their modules. Let's see, about when was it that they did that? 2005. So about 15 years into the project, they're planning a project and a bid to replace all of the buildings that were done. This was back in around 2004, 2005, 2006 when all of this work went on. So that's an example of what we probably don't want to have happen. So I think we're getting to the time now where we would want some policy in place at the BPU. Another instance of liaison with the BPU here to try to incent people to keep them in place.
Are you saying that should be a mandate? Some sort of mandate to keep running those solar panels for 20, 25 years, whatever?
That might be it, a mandate or an incentive. I guess those are the two choices.
That wouldn't be very good for your business, so.
No, well, I mean, it's great for my business. We will be bidding on that project if it goes to bid, and it's good business for us, but it's not necessarily good public policy, though. So yeah, I mean, those are your tools, incentives or mandates, and or a combination of both.
I guess maybe just along those lines in terms of how we would conceptualize that, I do think, perhaps, and maybe this isn't a huge difference, but just in terms of as opposed to keeping in place for a certain amount of time, keeping in place until the power output is below a certain threshold. And I guess I'm just thinking in terms of that, gosh, you don't want to write some bad policy where someone ends up in a situation where, a tree falls on their house and breaks their panels, but then they're stuck with these broken panels on their roof. And, just sort of conceptually that you would, maybe, I don't know, if the 20-year estimate is, oh, that they'll maintain at least 75% of their output. And, something like this, we would say, okay, they need to stay in place until they're getting 65% of their original output, or, whatever it may be. But just conceptually, that I guess I feel like, we don't want to be painted into a corner time-wise, I think,
I
necessarily.
don't even know if this is like a plausible thing, but like people who keep the panels on their roof for longer periods of time, couldn't they be incentivized in a manner whereas they are selling their energy, the generated or the built up energy, selling that back to the power company?
Mm-hmm. Well, that could be, that could be one way to incentivize it. And Daniel, I
if
like
it's
your
feeding the
idea.
grid,
Yeah.
they could get some type of,
Well, that's how the primary incentive now is like that, but it ends at 15 years. So maybe there's a way to have, a portion of that continue for a longer period of time through, let's say, 25 years at maybe a lower rate, but still enough to make it worth it for people to continue. And Daniel, I think that's a really smart idea to make, if it were a mandate, that it could be, or a disincentive, it could be based on a percentage of the original output. That's a clever way to do it, I think.
Yeah, that's smart.
So I wonder, in those, like the case you're describing, Lyle, where a bigger array is at 15 years and then being put up as a repower, then that would still have to go through BPU, right, to be permitted. And so it seems like we could ask BPU to add another consideration on their list. Check the box. If this is a repower, then what are you going to do with those panels? Or put it in the queue for this other kind of extended SREC program or whatever.
Yeah, but I think that's going to become a big thing with people, either repowering too early.
It's interesting with what Dave mentioned about the lead-free solder kind of time horizon. It sounds like that array might be old enough that those might be lead solder containing.
It's possible, and you could find out, by the model numbers. And this was, a big school system that ended up doing, I don't know, probably well over a dozen schools. It might be as many as 20 schools. So, and it was over several, I think 2 or maybe 3 different time frames when they did separate projects. So that would be a bit of detective work there to find out just the model numbers. But then you could find out how they were made.
Okay. And don't worry, I just wanted to say that, you said something to the effect that we should keep if we are reusing these panels, they should be kept in New Jersey, basically. Is that what you were saying? Well,
that was the best way for us to be certain that they would be disposed of properly once they're dead.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there would be just enough demand for those, though, within New Jersey, just New Jersey.
But you could say within the U.S., because then at least there's the potential for enforcement of standards as long as it's in the U.S.
Joe, do you have anything to say about that? You had that company that shipped the solar panels to Ghana. Are you in touch with them, by the way? Are you in contact?
No, not recently. No. I guess there's a great need for regulatory infrastructure to support anything like that. So the concepts sound feasible, possibly, but the devil's going to be in the details and how the state decides to regulate it. And there's really not much infrastructure to support that type thing at this point. So
there's not.
We do have a board member at MCA, the trade organization, that's done a lot of this work to build projects in less developed countries, especially Africa. So we can get ideas from him on how to ensure that it's actually going on that school or that hospital or that clinic, and not into a landfill out there.
Mm-hmm.
So this company, what is the regulatory framework? I mean, how is this company operating right now? They're just picking up solar panels from wherever and then ship them to Africa? I mean, do you know?
Well, from what I understand, Nick, it's based on a long-standing personal relationship with people in Ghana. And they've done it basically through electronics recycling. And it begins with that, and then that kind of long-term trust relationship builds into a business relationship. And it's matured from electronics, TVs, computers, into solar panels. I'm not sure that they've shipped they've consolidated their first shipment yet, but they've had active discussions on that level. It's not government to government, if that's what you're aiming for.
No, I'm just saying, so they haven't shipped anything from this country?
To my knowledge, no. My knowledge.
Oh, okay, so just on the...
It's building on the precedent that's been set through the electronics realm.
I didn't get to see that presentation, but my understanding, I'm assuming we're talking about the same individual, Robin.
Yes.
He has a long history in electronics repair interest. So I think he has a fairly developed ability to look, take a product, whether it's an electronic product or maybe even a solar panel now, and determine whether or not it's still working and viable for reuse. And then he would ship it to people in Africa or wherever they may go, where there's still some residual value in the reuse market for those products. I think that's what he's talking about.
Yes, that's correct.
So my concern was that then shipping product to these marketplaces then very likely put them in a situation where there would not be a recycling program and they would go into a landfill for sure.
Eventually, after reuse.
Eventually, right.
Yeah, eventually.
And, those markets overseas, whether they be Southeast Asia, South America, or Africa, wherever they may be, they're also developing and are, growing in their own interest in recycling and reuse of materials.
Sure.
Okay. All right. What do we talk about next? Jim Entwistle? Are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear him?
Thank you. Well, I just had a chance to glance over your recommendations. So your recommendation is mainly just to regulate these end-of-life solar panels as universal waste. Is that correct? I was just wondering, do you have the end markets in place right now? If you were to start that as a Class D operator, are there end markets available currently in New Jersey and?
Yes.
I can't hear him.
No, I can't hear him either.
Wait. You can't hear him?
Yeah, I hear him a little bit, very low volume.
How about now? Try to speak, Jim.
Can everybody hear me?
Very low volume.
I'm not sure where my speakers are. How about now?
Can everybody hear me?
A little better.
A little better.
Yeah, I heard myself there, so it sounds like it's a little bit better.
I don't know what I got to do.
Is that good, Asia? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I can hear it now. So a couple of things. As far as my internal infrastructure in place to take apart the monitors or the PVs and process them, I do not have anything in place in New Jersey. I would in turn be a logistical, let's call it a conduit, where I would send it to an approved downstream facility. And I want to answer a concern that Lyle had brought up, and David, of course, knows this because of electronics. You know, in the electronics world, we have to be certified. So we're an NJDEP approved facility, licensed facility to handle e-waste. Part of my thought process was to add PVs to that as a starting point. A big factor is that in order to be an NJDEP approved facility, we have to have a certain level of certifications. With those certifications comes the responsibility of downstream due diligence and making sure that where we're sending material is handling that material in the proper fashion. Through the regulations and through our certifications, this downstream due diligence is critical in order for us to maintain it. So you're talking about, you know, trust or, you know, where you're sending it. The recycler owns the responsibility for the downstream. So once a panel is sent and shipped, that then becomes the responsibility of the recycler. So I just kind of want to put that to rest because I think it's important to understand that in the electronics side of the business, we are responsible for everything that comes into our facility and making sure that the downstream is the proper downstream. You know, is it a perfect world out there? I'm going to tell you no, but we're always going to do the very best we can with the information and the facilities that are available to us. And I think that that's important. From an economic standpoint, and I brought this up in previous discussions, you know, as someone that runs a business, owns a couple of businesses, we need to make sure that we're making money. A big concern of mine is who is going to fund all of this, and that's why I suggested the advanced recovery fee. I think there's certain steps that we need to take in order to get this to be similar to electronic waste, because I think it's a perfect fit for it, especially when you have facilities already in place in the state. With that said, I mean, in the last, I think, 2 weeks, there's probably been maybe 10 articles or so, or at least, you know, maybe 6 or 7 articles on recycling, how the feds want to get involved, and, you know, in private industry. There was one, I don't know if it came through this group, the NREL, you know, the best practices. There's so much information out there. This industry of recycling the actual panels is truly in its infancy, and it's going to take time for it to develop. I just think that the infrastructure that we put in place or suggest to put in place always has that flexibility to adjust to the changing technologies that are coming. You know, there are people that are interested. I've gotten a couple of calls from other recyclers in the country that are looking to, you know, have a piece of equipment. At one point, I had a piece of equipment that I used for CRT monitors, that we separate the leaded glass and the non-leaded glass. So there are people that are out there and that are interested, but it's going to take time. I think the key is to just keep moving this forward and build the infrastructure as best as we can with the resources that we have today. Get it in place with the knowledge that, hey, innovation is going to come, prices are going to come down. I just don't want people to get bogged down. And in my letter to everybody, you know, I said that don't get bogged down in all the details, because yes, it's a concern that when we spread, let's say, you know, PV, that there might be some leachate or some exposure. But it's who is bearing the burden of that exposure and how that exposure is being handled. You have to also understand that people are not going to tell you everything. You know, they're regulated as much as we're regulated. So there are controls that are in place to protect, you know, the environment and, of course, the people. And please understand, too, that as an electronic recycler, the last thing that I want to do is send to an illegitimate downstream vendor and put my reputation at risk. I think that's important for everybody to understand. So just some thoughts from the electronic recycling side of the world. And, you know, of course, I've suggested before, you know, we're willing to be a pilot program, you know, a pilot facility. We are a DEP facility, you know, so I think that just dovetailing with what we currently do at electronics, this is a perfect fit. One last thing, I did see Joe. Joe's famous because I did see his presentation. And I did see Robin at Good Point's presentation. I thought it was very interesting. The whole Ghana thing, and David knows Robin from Good Point very well. For many, many years, he's been in the electronic industry. I don't know how viable Ghana is going to be long term. We shared some emails, Robert and I, after I viewed the presentation. He needs to get his infrastructure set up. COVID whacked him pretty hard with these facilities in other countries. You know, he had a facility in Mexico and this facility in Ghana. So he took a pretty hard financial hit. So I don't know how much he's going to be pressing that, you know, unless he gets some venture capital money or something, you know. He's a clever guy. He's a very nice guy and a very innovative guy. The funny part of that video, and I think, Joe, you saw it, was the what one of his employees did with some of these panels on top of his trailer. It was very interesting, and it kind of goes to the point of reuse where, boy, you got to know what you're doing in order to handle these panels, you know, in order to reuse these panels. Because that creates a whole nother, maybe in a whole nother industry, but a whole nother level of concerns. I mean, if you haven't seen the video, it's pure entertainment because, you know, one of Robin's employees put these old panels up on top of his roof of his trailer, and he set up this whole system by reusing old electronic parts to get his whole little array set up. It was very, very interesting. But feasibly, I don't think I'm going to be doing it anytime soon, that's for sure. But I just want to thank you all also in Asia and your group for, you know, including the recyclers' perspective in this. So always here to help.
Thank you.
This is Lyle. I'd like to respond to that quickly, if I might, because Jim brought up a lot of really good points and valuable points. Among them, the fact that the solar panel recycling is in its infancy and almost pre-infancy because it's, you know, there isn't an active industry out there yet. But being in its infancy, there's a lot of very fundamental issues that have not been settled yet. And so I appreciate the certification of the recycler, the fact that they're going to go to a legitimate and reputable home at some point. But what is that home? You know, it doesn't put my mind at rest, the fact that they're certified without knowing what is actually going to happen and what is going to be done when we don't really know what we should be doing. And I'm bringing up an issue that I think strikes to the heart of some of the factors to consider in what we should be doing. I mean, let's be explicit about what we're talking about here. What we're talking about when they go to a recycler is remove the aluminum, remove the copper, and then crush the glass and send it to a glass recycling facility. What the hell does that mean? You know, removing the aluminum, that's a no-brainer. It's easy, the material is valuable, should be recycled. Removing the copper, that's pretty easy. That's also a no-brainer. There is an active copper recycling industry out there, and the electronics are in a small box glued to the back of the panel. If you remove that, I'm starting to get a little bit uncomfortable. But the thing I'm really uncomfortable with is crushing up all the glass and sending it to a glass recycler and then saying, well, okay, it's a legitimate glass recycler, which is great, even certified, that's great. But what are they actually going to do with it? You know, if it's going to end up, you know, in some sort of landfill somewhere, that's extraordinarily bad after it's crushed. If it's going to end up in some sort of product, I'd want to know that that product is not then exposed to the elements. And if it's going to be subjected to some very, very high temperature thermal process that is going to enable you to remelt and reuse the glass, then you've got all the different kind of plastic stuck to it. And you've got the remnants of the solar cells and the wires and the solder stuck to it. What is going to happen to that in a high temperature thermal process? That, to me, causes me grave concern. So, you know, I appreciate the certifications. I appreciate the reputability of both the recycler and the downstream off-takers, but I'd really want to know what's actually going to happen.
It will generally go, the plastic will be burned. Maybe they will be captured to some extent in the pollution control equipment. Any residuals would probably go to the slag pile at a smelter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then
Doesn't sound pretty, but that's probably the way it is.
that's what I'm imagining too, and
Yeah.
and it gives me a lot of agita knowing the nature of these materials and how they're connected to each other. So
Bear in mind, it will be a lead smelter or a copper smelter, and there will be lots of nasties already there in volumes that dwarf what we're talking about.
right. I mean, it could be that we're trading other than pre-2006, which might need its own policy, but after that, we may be trading an absolutely minimal potential for leachate to air pollution of a much, much greater magnitude, and that I don't think is where we want to go.
Which gets back to the basic economics of disposal, where you're looking at recycling centers that charge maybe $25 a panel versus a landfill. When you do the economics, it comes down to less than $2 a panel, maybe $1 a panel.
Even if the cost was the same, before we even talk about cost, I'd like or I think it's a good idea for us to say which way has the least opportunity for substances that could affect human health entering the environment at whatever stage, and then look at cost.
But we also are facing a capacity issue on our landfilling, right? And the panels are bulky; they take up a lot of room, a lot of storage.
Yeah.
So there's another, another area we have to consider.
Yeah, and we did look at volume in the quantitative analysis that we did, with help from Dunbar, and so we have those numbers. And of course, it's a whole different story whether you're just talking about the glass sheet without the frames. Is a small fraction of what it is with the frame. So you got to be specific about that.
Just correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not an expert on the demanufacturing process, but I think a lot of the panel is sometimes damaged as you try and remove that aluminum frame.
Well,
right. So
that's something you have to be very, very careful of. Yeah, you have to, and that's part of consolidating where they go, because if you try to do it manually, there's more chance of breakages relative to if you have the right equipment.
Is there room to take a look at the model being created for the wind power industry, where the state has set up an institute for trainers for training and building an infrastructure that way? Is there something, Lyle, that is analogous in the solar panel industry? I mean, the state's invested a considerable amount of money in building an infrastructure for the wind power industry, and that's in its infancy. The solar power industry, really, if you do, as you described accurately, it's in its pre-infancy. Why is there not a similar validity to doing something like that?
Well, I would agree that there should be. The wind industry, ironically, hasn't even begun in New Jersey and is years away from being done. But the attention and the cohesiveness of the planning has been much greater than the solar industry, which just sort of started organically and grew and grew and grew. So it's not like there was a lot of pre-planning of how that would play out.
Right.
So it's a really good point. We need more of that.
Yeah.
So I think that part of the wind intensity effort is that thinking about installation supply chains, using the ports and creating the businesses locally that would support all of the construction and installation. And so that's an entirely new industry, whereas the solar installers like Lyle are here, and it wouldn't add new industry as we look at recycling. It's just sort of a little bit to add in a new way. So the wind industry is much more of a full supply chain new growth.
Is there a labor shortage in the industry, Lyle?
Not really, no. Yeah, that has been a major problem. But there's no organized training institutions. There are a few small training for how to install solar panels and how to design them, but not in terms of end of life. There's nothing that I know of.
Yeah. That may be where we give some attention to training the folks who will deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Certification, testing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think the number one thing is as we start to plan for handling modules end of life would be to have, one or more central aggregating facilities that would be fed so that you have the volume that it takes to get the proper equipment and the proper trained individuals
right.
That handle it. You don't want just any old place that does this one day a week and the rest of the week they do something else. We want a dedicated facility where people are trained, they're doing it every day, and they've got the right equipment, which may be, a little bit expensive.
Okay. Chris, do you have anything else you want to talk about, Chris?
Nothing specific beyond, I think, what we've already discussed as a group. There was one other item that has come up, and I just want to mention it. So when we talk about the impact to the cost of solar, there was legislation passed not too long ago relative to increasing pollinator habitat, which then influences that particular item into our ground-mounted solar arrays that are being placed in many municipalities now. So there's a DEP, I think, has an obligation within a period of time, and I don't remember if it's 1 year or 6 months, to create regulations that identify requirements for establishing pollinator habitat within the array itself, between panels, access areas, buffers, and so forth. And I know DEP is developing this best management standard, which will also obviously have an impact on those ground-mounted displays, both, I think, initial cost as well as just maintenance, because managing vegetation in and around the array is obviously a concern. So there's just another little layer of potential added operational, design and ongoing costs. So, and I think it could influence even the spacing of the panels. Was introduced in one of the drafts of the BMPs that I saw. So it could limit the number of panels even slightly, potentially. So just wanted to let the group know. I don't know if anybody came across that legislation.
Anybody else? So Jim, I was wondering, you said you would be interested in to have a pilot program for solar panel recycling at your site, at your facility. So
Yes,
then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I would.
Okay, so, I think Lyle mentioned something about training. So what type of training would you be able to provide to your staff, I guess? Would you be able to?
As far as training goes,
yeah,
you got to understand that we handle people.
We lost you.
That question too loud. Jim? Jim, he's posing that question too loud.
Lila actually mentioned they can help consolidation point to bring the product in and store it, so you get truckload quantities rather than move the product. So all that takes space, all that takes time, all that takes money. And I do need to be incented as a business owner in order to dive into this. And there's so many variables going on right now And I'm just concerned that if we get into this analysis paralysis thing, so worried about every little thing, leachate. I mean, I've been down the road with leaded glass, you know, and that's been handled and taken care of. And now we're talking about PV modules. You know, I'll do my best to give the group, and I'll get down to my downstreams that I've researched to see how much they'll share with where that product is to give.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So can I ask a question? I don't know what the standard practice is for disposal of the leaded glass that might come out of old TVs.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Should I say that again?
Go ahead, Ace. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
Yeah, so I was curious about what the standard practice is for disposal of the leaded glass that comes out of those older TVs.
Yes, I gave a pretty long dissertation there. You must.
Yeah, he was asking it to Lyle. He was asking to Lyle. He was asking that question to Lyle.
No, I was asking Jim, I think.
It's asking Jim.
You are asking Jim? I can't hear. I can't listen to both. Sorry. So is it to Jim or to Lyle? I'm sorry.
I think it's to Jim.
Jim, yep.
The question about training is to Jim?
No.
It was
Question
about leaded glass disposal.
Let me just back out and you guys say it to him, okay? I'll just
Jim,
let me put the
it'd be good to
headset
hear
up.
from Jim. He may have different view or information, but one fairly common outlet at this point in time is lead smelters. And two, leaded glass is being used for tile frit, I think. Tile coatings.
Huh, okay.
Okay, Jim may have some other alternatives, but those are the two that I'm most aware of.
I'm happy with that.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the alternatives that I have as well.
Okay, I just had one question, and I mean, some of the recommendations I see in a few recommendations, you guys mentioned establish a landfill ban in New Jersey for disposal of the panels. I mean, is it even an issue? Are any panels going into landfills in New Jersey at the moment? Do you guys know?
I don't think there's any data that would give us a definitive answer, but anecdotally, from what we hear from members, I'd say some.
Some?
Yes, there's definitely some that they get disposed of, and we don't really know where, but I would think that some go to landfills. Small quantities, I'm sure, because not many solar panels are reaching end of life yet.
Would that be generally as construction waste or something else, you think?
Yeah, I have evidence in some of my consulting work before PSE&G that there were certain landfills in New Jersey that were receiving solar panels, unaware of any haz waste issues and so forth. So I do know. I don't think they're significant volumes yet. I think those are damaged panels coming off of residential applications for the most part. But I did come across evidence in the last, say, 5 to 7 years that certain municipal landfills in New Jersey were accepting.
Yeah, and are solar panels classified in New Jersey as haz waste? If so,
it's up to, yeah, I mean, that's the big concern I think we've talked about a lot here is, how
currently it's not. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's up to the generator to make that determination, right, of their waste, and that's one of the problems. Panels are not easily, it's not easily determined, and based on the constituents, we as a company, for instance, have looked at them as hazardous waste because of the nature of the lead within the panel itself. So I don't know. Others have different opinions of that. So.
Yeah.
Is there an administrative code that requires the classification, or is it voluntary?
Well, I
It's
think under
voluntary. Yeah,
well,
there's
under RCRA, right? I mean, RCRA requires the generator to make a determination
Yes.
of their waste, of their solid waste, to determine if their solid waste is hazardous or non-hazardous.
Are there guidelines provided so that you can make the the decision, or is it solely up to the applicant providing this information?
There are steps that EPA outlines for how to determine whether waste is hazardous. I don't have them right in front of me, but essentially determining whether it's a solid waste, and then determining whether it's a listed waste, and then determining whether it's a characteristic waste, and then determining whether there's an exemption. It's a little more nuanced than that. I don't have a step-by-step, but I have to pull it up. But that's essentially how they try to get you to determine.
So, Nick, David, in New Jersey, would there be a household exemption under that scenario? Or has New Jersey somehow? Yes?
Yes, it could be a household, yes.
It's
or household hazardous waste, yeah.
Because
how residential, if you may be able to probably take a panel or two to your local county. I mean, I don't know for sure if that's going on right now, but
I guess in some states, if it's a household generated waste, my understanding is it would be exempted from hazardous waste management.
Yeah, that's typically true. Anything generated in a residential household is easily exempted.
yes, that's when the counties have that household hazardous waste day, and you take them there. You can.
Mm-hmm. But if it's a commercial or nonprofit facility, not a household, I'm not familiar with how, if the generator is responsible for determining whether a material is as hazardous or not, how they make that determination and according to what standards. That's not something I'm familiar with.
It's extreme difficulty, if at all. I don't mean to be facetious.
I could see if I could find an actual step-by-step. I think EPA does have a flow chart somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where right at this moment, but I know I believe they have some guidance to outline how to figure it out. It depends on where the material is going. It depends on a couple things. I know the new, depends on how you define new. The definition of solid waste rule that got passed in 2015 changes how EPA looks at certain materials that are being recycled or reclaimed. And certain materials are now not considered solid wastes if they're being recycled. And of course, then you have to determine whether it's actual recycling or sham recycling. But assuming the recycling was legitimate, then the materials are not a solid waste at all. The issue then would become that not every state has adopted this definition of solid waste rule, and what happens if it travels outside of a state that has adopted it. I'm not 100% positive whether that means the material has to revert back to a hazardous or solid waste or not. I have to do some research on that.
Yeah, that is complicated, Nick. We were looking at that rule too, the hazardous secondary material rule. So it avoids certain waste from being determined hazardous. But again, it's only adopted by a handful of states right now. So if you're shipping in between states, it gets a little cloudy on how you have to characterize it as it ships interstate into other states. So I agree with you. It's not an easy determination when it comes to these characteristics for solar panels in particular.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, with the newer panels, do we even have to be concerned with hazardous waste, the hazardous waste issue? Do you guys think? I was just wondering what you guys think about that. No, nothing.
and don't know.
So right now, Chris, PSENG, you ship your end-of-life solar panels to this landfill in Michigan out of an abundance of caution. Is that
So-
basically what you're
So
doing?
we ship to Michigan as hazardous waste to a hazardous waste storage facility. So it's a hazardous waste landfill in Michigan.
It's a hazardous waste landfill.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. I mean, you ship. I mean, some of these panels that you ship there, they are damaged or they're crushed or whatever.
They are. Majority are damaged. Remember, we have pole mounted, so we have placed panels on utility poles, which the motor vehicles love to hit, and storm events as well. A number of them do come down, and most of the time when they come down, they're not repairable. They're damaged, and they are shipped as haz waste offsite.
Okay, has there ever been an issue with leaching at all? With these damaged or crushed, has there any been an issue with that?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't know, because at this point we manage as hazardous waste, so it's provided in, secondary containment at our storage facility, and every 90 days we have shipments that are shipped out to, again, a facility that's licensed to accept hazardous waste. So,
okay.
I mean, it's expensive. It's not a great alternative. Even the cost of looking, when we started to evaluate what could we do other than ship as hazardous waste, we looked at hazardous secondary material. We looked at a number of recycling facilities in Arizona. I think there's a couple out there. There's one in Texas. There's one in Ohio. But it becomes the ability to ship what we consider hazardous waste to a facility that doesn't have the ability to receive hazardous waste, to then recycle it, because it does not fit into, it's not a federally listed universal waste. It's not, all the states have not adopted. And then as Nick was mentioning before, I think on the hazardous secondary material rule, it's a very complicated animal. And we've been working with DEP directly, trying to figure out if we have the ability to ship as hazardous secondary material. And we're still trying to evaluate that option, in hopes that we have some rule changes here that make life easier for, the community at large, including us.
Hey, Chris, I would encourage you to look at the new ASTM standard on characterizing the panels for the TCLP test. That may help you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we'll
think
take a look.
that'll be what it comes down to. Because it's not, the panels themselves aren't specifically listed, so it's going to come down to, one, how they're disposed of, whether it's legitimately recycled or not, and then two, if it's actual disposal instead of recycling, then it's going to have to be whether those metals are pink for a characteristic waste. And I think that's how you're going to have to determine whether these panels are hazardous waste or not.
Well,
and I think, Chris, I think I got an email from my supervisor with something you had sent from a facility in Arizona, and I was looking at that this morning afternoon, and I mean, I think where we're going to find the hang up, and was in your email, is what's going to happen to this material that it goes through a state that doesn't have the 2015 rule adopted, because assuming the recycling is legitimate, I would think, primarily, I'm not making a broad statement, but I would think it could be sent maybe just as a recycled material that's not even a solid waste. I'd have to still dig into it a little bit, but it looks possible.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I thought the same, but I wanted to, figure out that question of shipping to a state that hasn't adopted the rule amendment, or through a state.
I might have to see if I can reach out to somebody at EPA on that, or maybe probe my supervisor's brain a little bit and see if he knows. I'm not completely sure right now.
No problem. Thank you.
okay, well, I don't have anything else to talk about. Does anybody else have any comments? Anything you would like to talk about? Or
I just made one point I'd like to ask the experts, meaning Lyle. Is there any possibility of designing future solar panels to be more repairable? Or is there any room to do that? Because of what Chris said, right now you can't repair them once they're broken. I mean, is there any way the design would be potential? Is there any? I mean, right to repair seems to be a very in vogue concept on all kinds of appliances. Is this something that has any potential here?
Mm-hmm.
I guess
I guess
I'll
not,
jump
because
in.
of the way you've described them. They're
Yeah.
so durable, you can't repair them.
I would jump in and say that the key part is silicon wafers. Silicon wafers are brittle as all get out. They can just fracture barely with any flex. And then you've got solder and wires and the whole kit and caboodle. You just have to really be gentle with it.
Yeah, I mean, without getting too complicated about it, my answer would be highly likely not any practical way to make it repairable, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What percentage are breaking or need to be repaired?
Very small, very small. I mean, it's a kid throws a rock, or a worker drops one, or gets broken during shipping, and so it's an extremely low percentage that
Or in Chris's case, car crashes into pole mounted
yes, right.
ones.
This-
Right. Yeah,
That is correct.
I
Yeah.
think New Jersey may be the only state that does that, though.
pretty
The
much.
worst drivers.
Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, I guess once we have a draft report ready, with our recommendations, we'll reach out to all of you and then we'll set up a meeting, okay?
I've got regarding the last conversation that we went through.
Hmm.
I've been looking for actual data on leaching, and it's incredibly sparse, even doing a worldwide search, and it's hard to get specifics about what is it for an intact solar panel versus what it is for a crushed solar panel versus what it is for a simply broken solar panel. I'm just not finding much. How expensive would it be for the state to actually do a test? Because we're sort of shooting in the dark here, and it'd be wonderful to shine some light with some real data. Maybe Rutgers or Princeton or some other institution or an engineering firm with a test facility. Just get a sampling of a few solar panels intact, a few broken, a few crushed, and do an actual test and see where we are. Is that a possibility?
That should be part of the recommendation.
I would agree. Yeah, it'd be great to make decisions with actual data.
Yeah.
I would
Suggest-
certainly support that recommendation.
Does anybody know what TCLP test, who does it and how expensive they are?
They are very expensive. I think I'm not sure the amount. They are expensive and time consuming. So
are we talking thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of dollars?
that I'm not sure. Nick, do you have any? Nick Baer, do you have any idea?
I'm not quite sure. I might be able to poke around and find out. I think you're on the right track, though. I know they're expensive and they're definitely time consuming because I think each test is 24 hours. So.
I recently tried to do some, and I was told that, checked with several labs, that I had to grind up the panel and provide them with a sample of the materials, that they were unprepared to grind something that large in their laboratory to prepare a test. But I'm going to guess, $1,000, $1,500 to do a test, maybe for a metal.
Yeah. Well, that's.
I don't know if anybody remembers, but Tommy McGuire said that they T-clipped everything to death. They're tired of T-clipping, but they do have a database. They have a database that lists the manufacturer type and whether or not it contains I mean, maybe that could be something in lieu of skipping a T-clip test. If someone else T-clipped it before and they got the records, he said he'd be willing to share that information with us.
Yeah.
Who is that, please?
Tommy McGuire, the president of either ECM or I can't remember which one of the recyclers it was.
Yeah. I'm going to reach out to those guys, Aisha. I think I asked you for the contact information.
He said he would share that information with us about the models and the manufacturers and whether or not they're hazardous or not. He tests it and maintains some sort of database.
That would be enormously helpful. But even so, it'd be good for an impartial entity to do a test would be valuable. And furthermore, if the test has been entirely conducted on crushed materials, you know, that's the worst end of the question. It implies that there isn't even a test devised for an intact solar panel, and that would be an extremely valuable piece of information to have. And if a test would have to be devised for it, then it sort of cries out for doing that and having that information.
It's a kind of an unusual test because measuring a small quantity of material is pretty habitual in the chem labs. But measuring a module that's 1.5 meters square, you know, and making, so it's just a very odd custom experiment.
Sounds like it would be.
Yeah, I would imagine.
If I remember the GCLP test correctly, you have to grind the material up so that it will pass through, I think, a 5 millimeter sieve.
Oh,
probably.
Yeah,
50
it's a media that has to simulate a landfill.
Yeah, it has to be ground up fairly finely to do that test.
Yeah, and then they pour a ton of water on it and then wait and then collect the water from that media underneath that media and then test that. For, you know, hazardous waste parameters. So
sounds like what we're dealing with is a science and a standard that's not necessarily applicable to the material to be tested, or the objective of the test.
And that's what that ASTM standard was trying to address: is how do you prepare a panel, you know, a panel for testing and get a true representative sample that can actually be, you know, tested using these EPA protocols in a laboratory.
Yeah,
well, you can't put a whole panel into the test.
And right, and so that's an extremely narrow, an extreme narrowing of the objective of the test, because that's sort of like a very arcane little corner of the question. So it sounds like you know, everything is in its infancy, and including how we test it, and we're not testing for the question that we're trying to answer.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. I don't know what EPA stance on that would be, if they would take a hard line and say, no, we don't. It has to be tested as if it was broken, because it has the possibility to break. I don't know. That's interesting. Because I would almost guarantee you there is no test for an intact unit, because like they said, everything's always small quantities. So they'd have to probably develop an entirely new apparatus for that.
Yeah, and it's easy to imagine how that could be done. I mean, it's a relatively simple test. It's more of a bureaucratic thing, and generally, you know, testing and environmental standards follow the science, and in this case, we don't have the science. So that is where presumably where one should start, is get the science in hand, and then move to a standard. But you know, maybe this is where New Jersey can actually lead the nation in terms of getting answers that nobody has.
Yeah, that'd be. I don't. Nick, do you know of anything similar to that? That where if it's in one state, it's maybe non-hazardous, but in another it's hazardous. Is that corrosive? There's no such thing as a solid corrosive. Am I remembering that correctly?
No, I can't think of anything.
Because I'm curious as to what the stance would be if they would say if it's intact then it's not a hazardous waste, but if it's compromised or broken then it would be. I'm not sure how they would feel about that.
Well, and you can't just classify it as hazardous waste without testing. I mean, even if it's broken, I mean, I can't just.
Correct. I'm operating off the assumption that it would fail T-clip if it was broken, but potentially pass if it wasn't.
Yeah,
And
I don't think
sorry,
that's a settled issue because there's orders of magnitude difference between a finely crushed solar panel and a broken one. The difference in the exposure for potential leachate is several orders of magnitude.
And that's the problem. The test makes you assume this worst case scenario that it is going to be, I guess, pulverized in a landfill into these finer powders.
Right. And what was the size? What was the mesh size that you mentioned, David?
We have to double check, but I want to say 5 millimeters.
5 millimeter. Oh.
Yeah, that needs to be double checked. Maybe it's 50.
Mm-hmm. Well, it wouldn't be 50. That'd be 50 would be 2 inches.
Well, it's SW846 test method 1311. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see what it says.
So I just threw the ASTM guidance in the chat. I think it's 9 millimeters is the particle size for the ASTM.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's not ultra fine.
And I think the whole idea of the T-clip is, it's looking at the waste and mimicking how it would exist in a landfill for a period of time. And I think that time frame is 25 or 30 years. And that's how they that's why they just, use destructive testing and grind materials down to that
I see.
sample size.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, sorry to hold up the show, Nick.
No problem.
Just
thank you. No, thank you. No, thanks. Thank you for your input, everybody. So,
yeah, much appreciated.
Right. Thank you, everybody. So we'll reach out to you once, like I said, we have a draft document ready, and then Aisha will reach out to you for our next meeting, whenever that may be. So, okay.
Sounds good.
Very
Thank
good.
you very much, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Well.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, let me go down and check my. So when I talk to Steph, he thought you should be talking about it. I'm like, I think the gravity of hitting. Okay, that's possible. But so Jerry hasn't done anything, and I and Jeff haven't done anything. And Seth also mentioned the director of the, I guess, Department of Sanitation, or whatever it's called. And Seth thought that, if we did, we should be involved with the community of drill. Well, I don't know what maybe Tina does it on just behalf. I don't know. It should be me. Okay, then that's all I wanted to talk about. And I don't know what happened to my phone. Yeah, I mean, Megan's up there, Megan's up there, and I'm sure before her, same thing, oh, we want to be an excellent service company. Well, I guess Megan's got a new task. Mike Moskowitz really frankly left because he wanted to become a bureaucrat. Managing the internal service company. Excellent service provider. It's terrible. Has been trying to get an invoice. And it seems how forward she can't get the time. That's finally today, we heard back from the control ACC until that night. That he's finally doing it all the time. Well, maybe you'll have an opportunity to say that someday, because I think Jeff started typos. So I ended up taking care of it. Even the HR rep comes back and says, "Did you find anything about the problem?" I'm not going to answer you. So no. You want my record say, the report of the tech box. That's what I'm on the report for my vaccine card, and it seems like, I'm sure I'm just, trying for time, but all I do is I go in and I guess I had 2 shots, right? So I enter, apparently one of them is not registered, so I get an email saying, oh, you only entered your second shot, you have to enter your first shot. So when I enter the first shot, it overrides the second shot, and then I get an email saying, your second shot's not in there. So then that's got another one this morning, I tried 4 times to fix it. Into the phone? I want to call the IT desk. But we shouldn't have to do that. Okay, well, anyway, I may not be, I don't know if I'm gonna get this done tonight. Tomorrow morning, a million things to do. But anyway, I just wanted to get back to you on, this thing working there. So let's see if it's going. Okay, well, I should be here. So, I think our choice is go ahead with what we got. That's what Exponent wanted to do the last time we talked, right? Or wait for Hero Hopper. One or two. And honestly, I'm not sure these guys can do this. The guys in Japan. I think we have some kind of linguistic barrier. Yes, I know. Yeah, and 2 or 3 things, right? We can only, okay. I'm gonna ping him tonight, but that's our choices, is to go ahead with what we've got, take our chances, which Exponent literally recommended to us, right? Or, okay. I sat down at breakfast, right, and I had a bowl of cereal. I didn't put the milk in it, but somehow my shirt, which is, I'm wearing a heavy shirt today, got caught on the bowl, and the whole thing dumped over my life. Okay, so that's just indicative of the kind of day I'm having. And IT is not on my list of things I want to do, Okay, do have a good day. Me too. Thank you. Well, it's Minnesota's like 2.5 hours. Two. Okay, that's fine. Okay, Andrea, you have a good evening. Okay, good. Bye-bye. Okay, let me do my easy pass. 6. No, I cannot now. I'm busy. I'm really busy right now. Kami, can you let her out? Okay. Okay, let me go down and put this back in, and then I have to put plates on tonight. Okay. Well, apparently COVID's still going in China, isn't it?